Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get going here. First, I want to thank everybody for taking the time and being here tonight. I really appreciate that. Some of you have been at our past Tech Talks. This is our fourth of a series of 6 Tech Talks on educational process of the river corridor, the Kennebec River Corridor. Tonight's Tech Talk, as you know, is on the hydro facility and relicensing. My name is Buddy Lucero, and I'll be in a minute here introducing one of our speakers. But in the meantime, I also want to say thanks to our city staff. They are out here. You'll see some of them have their T-shirts on or their name tags on. Our corridor committee, our consultants, and there are some folks from the DNR. So if you do have any questions after the program, go ahead and approach them. They're there to help out, or any comments that you may have. We do request, if you're able to sign in, please sign in, because that's a good way that we're able to get a hold of you and contact you and keep you updated on what we're doing in our corridor planning process. As you know, we also have some refreshments in the back, some comment cards, again, question cards. If you have any questions you want to forward them on. We also have our website. Please visit the website. We record all these sessions, and these sessions are on the website so you can see them. And yes, the famous Kenny Corridor Project T-shirts are back there. So do try to pick one up. We are going to try to keep all the questions to the end of the presentation. We do have a place up there to ask the questions. But first I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mark Lodenberg. He's one of our project managers. Mark actually started off as being an engineer going to school in Platteville, Wisconsin. So he started off pretty well. That somehow he ended up in Minnesota. So he went off a little in his direction, but he's learned to come back. He's been studying, quite a bit on watershed management, flood routing, hydro studies, protection of dams and dam stability, and a lot on commercial and residential development. So you can tell that Mark has always been involved in water and enjoys doing that type of work. He has over 25 years experience in working with the city of River Falls. He has 35-year experience in overall engineering. He was here back in 1995 working on a groundbreaking 205J watershed plan for the Kennebec River in the city of River Falls. Now, that was a great plan that's out there that's being worked on and being implemented over the past years. He's also been involved in developing and working with the city of River Falls on our stormwater utility and the funding mechanism for that, which has been a very good benefit. We have one of the strongest stormwater management plans, and I believe in the state of Wisconsin. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this mic over to Mark and let him introduce Leslie.
Thanks, Buddy. Really do appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and want to touch base just a little bit on our agenda for this evening. We're going to really present in 3 parts. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about hydropower and kind of a high level. How does it work? How does it function? We're going to then have a little conversation about your hydro facilities in town, how they function. We'll give you some facts and figures about those, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the relicensing process. I know you've heard a lot about that. It's been part of the conversation in the community for a number of years, so we'll talk about that. And then, as Buddy mentioned, we'll go to question and answer and try to go through that with you as well, and try to answer a lot of those questions. As Buddy mentioned, this is the 4th of Tech Talk in a series of 6, and I want to give a commercial right away for Tech Talk number 5. So coming up in July, we're going to be talking about dam removal alternatives. We'll start getting into a little bit more detail there, and I expect that there may be some questions tonight that you may hear us defer to that evening. We'll do the best again to talk about some of those things tonight, but this is the agenda that we're going to follow. So next, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and Leslie Brautowski is with TRC. TRC is a national engineering consulting, construction and management firm. Leslie's worked on a number of hydro facilities from Nebraska to Maine, including hydroelectric facilities in Wisconsin and in Minnesota. In 2014, she was part of the team at TRC that worked with the city as they started to face the issues around relicensing and what the costs might be, and really that work was very important because it led to the extension of the relicensing process. That allowed this whole corridor planning process to be able to kick off and allow the community to have this continued conversation about how do you see the river long-term, what is the vision for the river and the community, and how does all of these things fit together. With that, I'm going to bring Leslie up and have her talk a little about hydropower.
Do I need to move it, or is it okay? Okay. Well, thank you for having me here. Today I wanted to start off, or did you want to talk about your milestones first, Mark?
Yeah, sorry, we missed
preemptive.
one of the slides. I think that there's been a lot of interest as we've kicked off, and we're probably just short of a year into this process, and yet we're really at the top of this chart still. We'll be holding a large community workshop in September or in late fall, which is really the culmination of the process of educating the community, but you see where we are kind of in that process. So as we continue to work through that, again, we want to emphasize that we're wanting to make sure that we get a lot of information out about the project and mostly hear from you. And then there's a lot of work still to go before the overall corridor plan is completed in June of 2019.
Okay, now we're going to jump in and do an overview of hydropower. So we wanted to start off really explaining in a nutshell what is hydropower and how does it work to set the stage for tonight's discussion. There's hydroelectric projects in almost every state in the United States with the combined generation of over 101,000 megawatts. And approximately 8% of the total generation capacity in the United States is from hydropower. And that makes up about approximately 48% of our total renewable energy that we produce in the United States to date. Here's an overview of hydroelectric projects in the United States, and the circles represent general abundance, or how many hydroelectric projects there are. And I should start off by saying hydroelectric projects are projects that generate power, electricity. There's dams throughout the country that serve multiple purposes. There could be mill pond dams, some are for flood storage, but these are looking at the ones that are specifically in place to generate electricity. So if you look at the circles, the general size of the circles are on the right, but in general, the smaller the circle, the less amount of energy that state produces from hydropower versus the larger circles produce more hydropower. And then the blue parts are the federally owned hydroelectric projects, so the Army Corps of Engineers and other federal agencies, Tennessee Valley Authority, BLM, Bureau of Land Management, own a lot of hydros. And then the orange colored ones are the privately owned hydros. So they're owned by municipalities and different utility companies that are privately held. So how does hydropower work? Hydropower basically is electricity that's produced from machines that are run by moving water. It's really kind of a simple concept. We've been using hydropower to generate machines and mills since pretty much we were first coming here and settling in the United States. But it works by flow, so water basically moving through, so the rate of water that's moving over a period of time, and then the difference in how far that water is falling and moving, which is better illustrated in this slide. So this slide is showing a graphic of kind of a general schematic of a hydropower operation. So behind here we have our reservoir. The dam is located over here. And how hydroelectric power is generated is the water moves from the upper part of the reservoir, travels down this tube, which is called a penstock, turns a turbine, which then causes a generator to turn and generate electricity. So the difference in the water falling from this area up here to down here is what's giving that energy, helping that energy to be produced. There are several benefits to hydropower. It's fueled by the kinetic energy of water. So there's no air pollutants associated with it, no carbon dioxide. It relies on the water cycle, so it's powered by the sun, so it truly is renewable. Water's flowing through, and the water cycle is helping to generate and move that water through. It is a domestic source of energy. It's low cost with high efficiency. Hydroelectric projects in general are very efficient. Each form of power has a different efficiency, so some are more efficient than others. Reservoirs themselves can offer recreational opportunities. Some projects do provide flood control, irrigation, and also water supply. Again, there's different types of hydroelectric projects, different types of dams that were put in place for a variety of different functions. There are some environmental considerations that we need to think about and talk about when we're talking about hydropower. So whether you're operating your dam or looking at relicensing your dam, these are the types of environmental considerations that come up that we're looking at to see if the dam is having any effect on those types of resources. I won't read through the whole list verbatim, but includes things like geology and soils, water resources, fisheries. We look at wetlands. Threatened and endangered species are definitely an important consideration. Recreation, often with hydroelectric projects, there's some form of recreation that's often associated with those projects. Aesthetic resources, cultural resources can also come up, anything from architectural resources, so some of the prehistoric to historic structures themselves, so structures that are over than 50 years old and have some sort of historic significance. Socioeconomic resources and tribal resources as well are all types of things that we consider. So one of the questions that came up when we were putting this talk together that people were interested in hearing about, so what's the difference between renewable energy and green power? So I have an actual quoted definition for renewable energy. Is any naturally occurring, theoretically inexhaustible source of energy as biomass, solar, wind, tidal wave, and hydroelectric power that's not derived from fossil fuel or nuclear fuel. With green power, the definition is similar but slightly different. Green power essentially is talking specifically about the electricity that's produced, wholly or in part from renewable energy sources. And I won't read it all to you verbatim, but and that definition is from the US Department of Energy. So basically, they're both kind of similar. They're not too different, depending on how you're looking at it and whose definition you're looking at. But generally, when we're talking about renewable energy or green power, it's from naturally derived sources. And then I will turn it over to Mark.
So let's talk a little bit about the hydro facilities in River Falls. There's a lot of folks in the room who have a lot more history with the dams in River Falls, but I think a lot of people also understand that dams have always been part of the history, and there's been at various times as many as 7 different dams on the Kinney. Today, the 2 dams that we're really going to focus on are the Junction Falls and the Powell Falls dams, and we'll talk about each of those. First of all, the Junction Falls Dam right at Winter Street, purchased in 1900, so it's been around for a while as part of the city of River Falls. Originally, there was a number of different dams there. The dam that exists today replaced a timber crib dam with gravity concrete, so it's a big concrete structure that was built in about 1920. So the structure's been there a long time and in good service. The new powerhouse, so that's the building that you see just to the left of the dam, was built in 1948. And behind the dam is, as Leslie showed you in the graphic, the reservoir. Lake George covers about 16 acres behind there. Generating capacity for the Junction Falls Dam is about 250 kilowatt, or the hydroelectric facility, 250 kilowatts. And it was rehabilitated back in about 1990. So you see kind of a stepped fashion across the face of the dam. The original construction of the dam was a smooth, what they call an OG crest, where the water followed over the shape of the dam. Back in 1990, there was some work done to improve the condition of the dam, and that current configuration was created. Again, we talked a little bit about how hydroelectric works, and through the falling water, there's about 34 feet difference between the crest of the dam and the downstream dam, and it's that falling water that helps to generate the electricity. The Powell Falls facility down below Glen Park had the original generating equipment was installed right around 1903, and new equipment was brought in 1948. So there's a fair amount of work that was done during that time to improve the operating conditions. The existing dam that you see in this picture was built in 1966, so it's quite a bit newer than the upstream structure, but it has less generating capacity. So on the right-hand part of the picture is really where the powerhouse is, and the generating capacity is around 125 kilowatts, so about half. The reservoir upstream of this dam, Lake Louise, many of you know the area is about 15 acres in size. And so those are the two facilities that exist today. Talk a little bit about operations. And when you think about hydro operations, a lot of times this conversation starts with run of the river. What's run of the river? Essentially, if you think about the water that's flowing to the dams today, and I don't know how many people had a chance to look, there's a lot of water coming through town today. Whatever's coming at the dam flows through the dam. So there's no water actually stored behind the dam, and that operation is actually part of the city's license and how it operates these two facilities. So all of the water that flows to the dam either flows through the penstock to generate electricity, or in a day like today when there's a lot of flow, you'll see water going over the top of the spillway. In that way, we're not holding back any of the water with the river. And it's all essentially coming through on a daily basis. In terms of flow variation then, the only thing that really creates a change in the flow besides weather, wet weather flow or dry weather flow, would be maintenance. And so there is periodic maintenance when debris gets caught on the screens that occur. Then there's a process that the city needs to go through to clean those screens. And so temporarily there's a reduction in flow while those screens are being cleaned if some of the gates need to be shut or reduced. And then shortly thereafter, the gates are open and the flow goes back up to more of that normal flow. But there is some variation in flow that's caused during the operation and maintenance cycle. In terms of temperatures, and there's been discussion about this and questions about this over the last several meetings. There's a documented 4 to 5 degree Fahrenheit difference in stream temperature from above the city to below the Powell Falls facility. And it's based on over 20 years of monitoring data that's out there. I see Kent Johnson's in the audience tonight, very instrumental with Trout Unlimited and doing a lot of that thermal monitoring. And so we understand that the conditions above River Falls and below River Falls are different. And really that temperature change reflects a couple things. It reflects not only the two reservoirs, but also just urbanization in general, and stormwater and other things contribute to that change. That said, when we think about the objective and really what we're after is to think about a very healthy stream. And this slide is taken from the DNR in terms of classifications of trout streams in Wisconsin. And so the entire stretch below the Powell Falls facility is rated as Class 1. I know there gets to be a lot of discussion around what is the classification. It's very high quality Class 1 trout stream above River Falls. It's also Class 1 below River Falls. So the fact that the dams are in place and you still have a Class 1 trout stream speaks very well to the management not only of the facilities, but also to the city's attention. We talked about the 205J plan and the work that you've done with stormwater management over those years to do everything that you can to maintain a very healthy stream downstream of the city. So power generation, we talked about both of the facilities generate a certain amount of power. And to give you kind of an idea of what that would look like, in 2016, the hydro generation powered about 270 homes, the equivalent to power that many homes in the city. We can talk about kilowatt hours, but I think when we think about it in terms of how many houses would be powered by hydro, you can see that Junction Falls, again, a little bit more than Powell Falls, but it's a significant amount. It's not the entire community, but again, it's something that the city has done for a long time, and it continues to benefit the community to be able to provide that level of power. Over 31 years, that relates to about 57,000 megawatts over time. And so the graph here is really just showing from the period of 1986 through 2016, power generation from Powell's Falls at the bottom, Junction Falls kind of in the middle, and then the combination. And you see a lot of variation, and there's variation for a number of reasons. We talked about, again, the dams and the hydro facilities operate on run of the river. So if you have low flow periods, you're going to get less generation. There are years when there's maintenance, or there's years when the dams were rehabilitated in 1990 that they're taken out of service, or there's equipment and other things going on. So there's variance from year to year, but over the long period, you'll see those periods begin to kind of stabilize, and that generation has been, again, a consistent part of the city's history over that time. The cost of generation can be broken down into a couple areas, and this is taken out of some of the public information that the city has made available around both the cost and the generating data. And I know this is fairly small. I really want to focus on the main topics there: the total hydraulic expense, the total hydraulic depreciation, and then the pilot calculation, or payment in lieu of taxes. These are the three main categories that the city has tracked costs for over, again, this 31-year period that we're looking at in terms of evaluating the performance and how the hydros have benefited the city over that time. To give you an idea what that looks like, from 1986 to 2016, the blue line is the cost for the city to generate hydro. This isn't the sales, it's the cost on an annual basis. So we're looking at the cost per kilowatt hour by year. The red line that you see kind of across the middle would be the wholesale rate. So for whatever the city doesn't generate, the city buys in wholesale, and then that's what it sells to all of its customers. So again, you can see a fair amount of variation in the cost to generate. So in the years of 1990 to about 92, 93, that's when the city was making a significant investment in the Junction Falls facility to have that rehabbed, and then looking at the expenses after that, the cost began to normalize, and again, some more work done in the early 2000s. And so you'll see those spikes in generation when you look at it on an annual basis, but it compares fairly closely with what the wholesale rate for electricity would be during that same period. If you can wait till the end, we'll try to answer all the questions at the end. So if you just hold that or jot it down, we'll see if we can cover that for you. In terms of generation of net revenues, you may want to think about it in terms of profitable performance. The sales over that same period, so just under $4 million in electric sales based on what has been generated at the two hydro facilities. The expenses allocated to those facilities over the same period of time, around $2.8 million, and so the net revenue, or profit, if you will, for the hydro facilities during that time, just a little bit over $1 million. That's an average of about $34,000 a year that the city makes off of the generating electricity and then selling that electricity back. So it's over a long period of time, and I showed you a lot of the variation. I took a smaller slice, and I picked this slice from 2010 to 2016 because it does represent one of the strongest periods that the city's had over that period of time, representing nothing more than the potential of what the hydro facilities can generate as they're fully maintained and operated and are working at their best. So over this period of time, so this is 7 years, just over $1 million in overall sales, $633,000 in allocated expenses, and a profit, our net revenues of just over $450,000. So about double what the average over the 31-year period. And again, I think it shows that in those periods when there's not a lot of capital investment going on, and when the city's made investments in improving the hydro facilities themselves and the generating facilities, that they can generate a significant amount of revenue for the community. So what about looking forward? What are the factors in future cost projections for the hydros? And it's a number of things to consider. I already mentioned, that river flow is responsible for the variation that you see from year to year, and certainly seasonal as well. The cost of wholesale power is going to be a factor in what the net revenues look like going forward. And if someone's got a good way of predicting what that's going to be, we'd like to certainly hear about that. We've actually seen wholesale power prices go down in the last year or two. And so whether that was expected by some, it certainly was a surprise to me. Retail rate of power is going to be a factor, operation and maintenance over that period of time, and how much work may need to be done for the dams themselves, for the generating facilities, the turbines and the generators. Obviously plays into the capital investment that the city will need to make. And there are capital investments, and you saw them over that 31 years, and there's capital investments that have occurred before that and will occur after that. There's costs that are related to relicensing and permitting. We'll talk about a little bit about those costs in a couple minutes. And then other allocated costs going forward, such as labor and insurance, other types of things that would be viewed as a real cost related to operating the hydro facilities. Today, we haven't made those projections at this point, and I mentioned early on, and Leslie reminded me to talk a little bit about the schedule, that we're still very early on in the corridor planning process, and like the previous tech talks, like the ones that are coming up, our intention is really to talk about what's happening and really hear from you on what your questions are and what the issues are. When we get later into this fall, we'll be preparing a report, a feasibility report to the City Council, so it will be done right around the first of the year. That will include a more detailed financial analysis along with the results of the original corridor planning work, which will be some alternatives, things that the community feels like you want to see happen with the corridor, with the river, and how we want to use that, and then costs related to those. So as the council begins to evaluate a decision around relicensing the two facilities, it's an informed decision, and it can be made based on what you know and what you've conveyed back to us during this planning process. The relicensing decision then must balance not only economic, but also environmental, regulatory, and opportunity costs. And so anytime you have a process like this, there's opportunity costs of going forward, and there's maybe lost opportunity costs depending on how and what decisions you make going forward. And so I want to switch gears a little bit now and bring Leslie back up. She's going to take us through the relicensing process, and we'll start with that.
Thanks, Mark. All right, so you keep hearing about the relicensing process. What does that mean? It's kind of a big thing that a lot of people don't know about. So the city's hydros are operating under a license from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So what is FERC? What do they do? Who are they? It's an independent agency that inspects private, municipal, and state hydroelectric projects. So hydroelectric projects, again, are those projects that are generating electricity. Their power comes from the Federal Power Act, and the responsibilities include issuance of license for new and existing projects, oversight of all ongoing project operations, including dam safety inspections and environmental monitoring. And in general, the FERC licensing process for relicensing an existing dam takes at least 5 to 5.5 years. And often when you're kind of going through and getting your materials ready, it can be even more front-loaded on the front end when you're kind of pulling your materials ready and getting ready to apply for that application. So it can be a rather lengthy process. The city was issued a 30-year license for Junction Falls and Powell Falls in 1988, and I will say that the two hydroelectric facilities are operating under one license, under FERC. So even though there's two separate facilities, they're operating under one license. And that license was set to expire on August 31st, 2018. And back in 2013, the city actually initiated the relicensing process. They looked at it and said the hydros are operating well. We don't see any need to change operation. Let's start the process. So they did that by submitting a notice of intent, an NOI, and a pre-application document, which includes some background information about kind of what we already know about the facilities, information about certain environmental considerations, kind of what the current generation is, and some other economic information. I'll go into that pre-application document, which then gets submitted both to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, and local stakeholders, agencies that can review that information. And during that time, local stakeholder groups did voice some concern about relicensing the hydroelectric facilities. with some people saying, hey, maybe removing the dams would be a better idea instead of relicensing the dams. And that caused the city to kind of take a step back because they went into the process thinking there weren't any issues or concerns in the community. So they did take a step back, and they requested and received a 5-year license extension from FERC. And they wanted to do this river corridor planning process, which we're in the middle of right now, to really help inform the decision. They wanted to take it back to the community and say, hey, this is what we have. What do you guys want? Do you want us to continue operating the facilities, or should we look at another alternative? And the FERC license is now set to expire on August 31st, 2023. So to remain in compliance with FERC's requirements, the city has 2 options. And again, these are options to remain in compliance with FERC. So the first option is to relicense the hydroelectric project, and the second option is to surrender the FERC license. So you may hear people talking about, do we want to keep the dams? Do we want to remove the dams? We're going to keep 1 or 2. What does that look like? But really, when we're talking in terms of FERC and the FERC license, which we do need to deal with in one form or another through this process with the deadlines that we have, we're talking about relicensing or surrender. So I'm first going to talk in those terms, talking about what it would take to relicense versus surrender, and then we'll go through and talk about some specific scenarios that the city and you guys are all looking at through part of the corridor planning process. For relicensing, the city would prepare and submit an application for a new license, and when we say new license, it's basically a renewal of the existing license. And that could include 1 or both of the dams for both of the hydroelectric facilities. So 1 or more of them could stay in place with relicensing. We wanted to break out some of the pros and cons, just kind of a general broad brush overview of relicensing. So some of the pros for relicensing, the city would continue to generate low-cost renewable energy. There's no funds needed for dam removal and restoration. The reservoir is currently acting as a stormwater pond for the city. And right now, with the existence of the dams, it is helping to limit the spread of potential aquatic invasive species that might be coming upstream, either now or in the future. And a pro of relicensing for some people, depending on your perspective, is it maintains status quo. The dams are going to stay in place, the impoundments remain, basically nothing's going to change. Some people don't like change, so they consider that a positive. From the cons, I'll just start at the bottom of that list. Some people view that as a con, nothing's going to change. So that's why it's on the list twice, is on the pro and con for things remaining the same. Some of the other cons would include water quality. When you do have those reservoirs in place, can affect the temperature of the water, and water quality can be affected. The dams do act as sediment traps, so some of the sediment that would normally continue downstream is getting trapped by the dams. Fishery, when you have a hydroelectric facility, you're getting a different fishery. You're having more of a lake-like environment, so it is changing from a riverine environment that certain fish species live in to more of a lake-like environment. And depending on the size of the reservoir, if it's a large one or a small one, that can actually increase some different sport fishery opportunities. But in the case of the Kinney, I think there's not a lot of diversity overall fishery-wise, so that is a con in the specific case. And also maintenance costs. With relicensing, of course, you still have the facilities, so you will have that ongoing continued maintenance. Okay, so then option number 2 is license surrender. Under license surrender, that could include removal or maintaining the facilities in place. So surrendering the license is surrendering the city's ability to generate electric power. So the license surrender can only happen between mutual agreement between the licensee and FERC. So even if the city decides that the FERC still needs to agree that they want to allow for the surrender of the license. The surrender process can be a little bit complex due to environmental implications. FERC is basically viewing what's out there currently as those are the current conditions, and if the city is proposing a change, there will be a number of environmental studies that they'll want you to look at to kind of project and figure out what some of those changes might be if those facilities were to come out. There will be NEPA document preparation. Just again, it's basically an environmental assessment, a detail of what's there and what would happen and change if the facilities were to be removed. And then FERC would either approve or deny the surrender after they had a chance to review a very detailed application. And then the license may be surrendered only after they fulfill the obligations that FERC prescribes. So once FERC would approve surrender, they would still provide you with a list of X, Y, and Z certain things that need to occur. Again, it's a regulatory agency, so whether you're relicensing or surrendering, there would be certain conditions that come along with either the license or the surrender document that you receive from FERC. And they may require mitigation for impacts of dam removal. One other thing I did want to note under license surrender, if the license is surrendered, FERC is obligated to publish a notice of the surrender in the Federal Register. So basically, they would notice the document that the city provides saying that they want to surrender. And at that time, another potential licensee could pick up the project and say, hey, I'd be interested in owning and operating that project, and could apply to FERC for ownership and operation of the project. And if that were to happen, the city would lose control of the hydros. So it's not usually likely to happen. It's a pretty small hydro, so there might not be another party that's interested, but I just do want you to know that through the FERC regulations, that could occur, just something to be aware of. Again, here's the list of pros and cons for license surrender, and this is assuming that the dams are removed. There are some other scenarios where you could surrender without removing the dams, but for the pro-con list, we're talking about license surrender with dam removal. So some of the pros of surrender are you could restore the river, restore the fishery, improve water quality, and through the corridor planning process, you could decide on some parks and green space that you may want to include in the river corridor. You would enhance river recreation opportunities. So some of the fishing opportunities or possibly even canoeing or kayaking would be enhanced through surrender. There would be no dam maintenance cost in the future because they wouldn't be there. And then it would also cause an aesthetic change. So some people would rather see a river flowing through the city. And then again, on the con side, aesthetic change for those people who like the look of the impoundments, Lake George, Lake Louise, for them that could be a con if they don't want to see that visual change. Other cons, you would have no production of renewable energy production from the hydros themselves. You would also, there's obviously cost associated with dam removal and restoration. And with the removal, basically with the change in the status of the facilities, you would need to do a historic American building survey, and historic American engineering record documentation. And I just put that on there as a con because it is, a bigger cost to the project. There's a few different things that would increase the cost, but that is one that would jack the cost up again with that option. With removal, you would have sediment release, so we would very carefully need to think about how you're going to manage the sediment once the dams are removed. And the city would need to address stormwater runoff. Again, the reservoirs are used a bit for stormwater for the city, so if that was not the case, we'd need to review and look at other options for that. Once the dams are removed, it could open up the river corridor, that section, to aquatic invasive species that could be traveling upstream. And aesthetic change, we already talked about that one. So that's just kind of a brief overview of some of the pros and cons for surrender. So one of the questions we often get, if we relicense now, can we surrender later? And the answer is yes, you certainly can. But if you do that, you should know that there would be a higher cost associated with that, and that's just because you would duplicate your application to FERC. So you would first have your application for relicensing, and then you would need to follow that up with an application for surrender, whether that's 5, 10, 20 years down the road, whatever timeline you guys decided was appropriate. And then most likely, if it's 10 years down the road, FERC is probably going to be wanting additional studies that would be done in support of the surrender application that you would need to submit to really define what might happen with the removal of one or more facilities. So it can be done. Another question we often get is what's the cost to relicense versus surrender? So these are estimated costs. So for relicensing, and I'll say up front that these costs are just for the FERC-related documentation and approvals. It doesn't include any cost for repairs or removal. This is just for dealing with FERC. So it's the cost for submitting your license, doing studies, and doing some, basically coordinating with FERC, resource agencies, and stakeholders. All those things have a cost. So average costs for that are approximately $150,000 to $200,000 for a project of this size. And again, you submit your FERC application, and then there's a couple years where you need to do, most likely need to do some studies to help support the final application. Because you start off the process by having a notice of intent and a pre-application document, and then usually you have a couple years worth of studies to gather information that you don't know about your project before you then submit your final license application to FERC. And that's generally why it usually takes at least 5 years to go through that process. With surrender, our estimate is about $250,000 to $400,000. And again, we have the FERC application this time for surrender opposed to relicensing. And in this case, we would project there's probably going to be more studies needed for surrender versus relicensing because it's a status change, or at least FERC views it as a status change. So when you are relicensing, that's again your existing conditions versus surrendering. You'd be changing the conditions, again, assuming that the dams would be coming out. And then also you would need those the architectural surveys and evaluations that would be done that have an extra cost. So that's part of why that cost is higher. All right, so that was kind of the overview of the FERC process for relicensing for surrender. But again, we want to use the river corridor planning process to inform the FERC licensing decision. So when we talk about that, there's generally 3 options. We can keep both hydroelectric facilities. So on this graphic, you have the Powell Falls here, Junction Falls here. So under the first scenario, I'll be talking about, you could keep both of those. Under the second scenario, you could get rid of both of those facilities and restore this to a free-flowing river. And under the third scenario that I'm going to be talking about, you could get rid of either one of these facilities and keep one. So those would be options that you guys as a community can discuss and think through. Okay, scenario 1 is keep both of the hydro facilities. Under scenario 1, thinking it in terms of our FERC application, what we need to do to stay in compliance with FERC, you would submit a FERC license application. The city would prepare and submit the application for a new license to operate the project. The dams would continue to remain in place on the river and generate hydroelectric power. And dam safety and inspection for the dams would continue to occur. Under scenario 2, we'd be looking at removing both of the hydro facilities. And under this scenario, we would have a FERC license surrender application. So the city would submit a notice of surrender, followed by a surrender application to FERC. And in this application, the city would outline their desire to remove the dams with a list of proposed studies and restoration plans. And the studies conducted, again, would need to address the change in status of the river, were the facilities to be removed. And then upon FERC approval, the city could discontinue operation of the hydroelectric facilities. Under scenario 3, we're talking about removing one and keeping one hydro facility. And then I've further broken this out into scenario 3A and 3B. So scenario 3A would be the FERC license application. And under this scenario, one of the facilities would remain in place and one would be removed. And so the city could submit an application and choose to continue, or basically apply to continue to generate power with one of the hydroelectric facilities. And then the removal of that second facility would be described in the license application. Studies conducted would need to address both keeping the one hydro and removing one hydro. And dam safety and inspection would still, of course, need to occur for the the hydro that's remaining in place. Under scenario 3B, we're keeping one facility and removing one facility, but surrendering the FERC license. And in this case, the city would express their desire to surrender the application, leaving one dam in place, but the dam that is remaining in place can no longer generate hydroelectric power. It can no longer produce electricity. And regulation of the remaining dam would then be transferred to the state of Wisconsin, opposed to FERC, because there does need to be an agency that is going to oversee overall safety to make sure that the structure is remaining sound. And that would be addressed with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And studies for surrender of the FERC license, again, would need to address both the remaining dam and the one that's getting removed. Here I wanted to do a high-level schedule that's going over the two options. So option 1 is FERC license application. Option 2 is FERC license surrender. In general, the city wants to make a decision of whether they're going to relicense or surrender the FERC application in February of 2018. And once they do that, they'll still have a lot of specifics to work out with those options. But in order to stay on track with our FERC schedule, that's generally the timeline that we're looking at to make that initial decision. By August 31st of 2018, the city would need to submit their notice of intent either to file for the license application or surrender. And if the city did choose surrender, the sooner we can submit the notice of surrender, the better, according to FERC. And then again in 2019, 2020, we would be conducting studies. So basically, if we're relicensing the project, we'd be conducting studies, basically trying to fill in the gaps of information that we don't know, that are helping to inform the licensing process. So any questions state and federal agencies might have, local stakeholder groups might have, specific to the hydro's operation on those resources could be addressed during those years of studies. And then the results of that information, along with existing information, gets put into a final application to FERC for the license application. And again, with surrender, we'd be conducting studies, but they'd be focused more on what might happen when one or more facilities are removed. Timeline for that, about August 31st, 2021 or sooner is when we'd want to be filing those applications. And then 2 years later, August 31st, 2023, if not earlier, we'd expect to receive a decision from FERC of relicensing or approval for surrender. Now this is kind of a lot of detail and not overly exciting stuff, but thanks for hanging with me here. So what are some of the trends in dam removal in the United States? For national data, there's approximately 90,000 dams in the United States. Approximately 1,384 dams were removed since 1912, and 72 were removed since 2016. And again, that's just dams. That's not necessarily hydroelectric dams, that's dams. So anything from mill pond dams to hydroelectric projects. Wisconsin specific data, there's currently about 3,900 dams in Wisconsin, and of those, 84 are FERC licensed projects. So that kind of gives you an idea of how many dams there are relative to those that are actually regulated by FERC and generating hydropower. And more than 130 dams in Wisconsin have been removed since 1950. And with that, we wanted to, dam removal alternatives are going to be discussed in much more detail on July 20th. So that's kind of our segue to move into any questions that you all might have about our talk tonight.
So before we get started with questions, we want to just go over, there's a lot of folks here tonight, so what we're going to ask is that if you have a question, we've got a podium back here with a mic. We're going to ask that you keep your questions to just one question. If you've been at a couple of these, we had a lot of folks who were up in line and want to make sure you get a chance to ask Leslie and I or members of our committee we may bring up for some of the questions that we have tonight. If we're not able to answer the question directly, we'll try to connect with you either tonight or have an opportunity to touch base later on. But again, as we mentioned, tonight we really wanted to focus on two things, really the relicensing process, because I think there's a lot of information there that is important to understand the nuances, as well as the current operation of the hydro facilities. So with that, we'd be happy to take some questions.
I'm William Hanson. I just was curious, I had a number on abandoning the license. It cost $250,000 to $400,000 cost related to that. Those are just costs related to the licensing process itself, or are they costs that would include the cost of dam removal?
Nope, that's licensing or surrender process themselves.
Okay,
So that's
so-
just dealing with FERC.
So beyond that, the brick and mortar
The
below
brick
the
and-
dams?
Right, brick and mortar, either for, any potential repairs to existing or removal, were not included in that number. That's just for the approval from FERC for one process or the other.
Thank you.
How you doing? Matt Lochman. I had a question about the revenue numbers that you were showing up there. You showed the revenue for the most recent 10 years as a positive. Is there kind of the upswing? Is there countervailing downswing we saw there at the worst points? What were our losses there? And then also kind of the ratio of wins to losses there. Are we more profitable more often than not profitable? Kind of that ratio.
It's a great question. So over the 31 years of records that we took a look at, the overall operations I would characterize as something around break even. So the cost on an annual basis vary quite a bit. So when I showed the chart that had the rate variations, and it depends on what's going on in that period. So in fairness, yeah, the last 6 years have been very good years. In some of those years, 90, 91, 92, and the city was making some significant capital investments, about $900,000 in repair of the Junction Falls Dam. Obviously, negative cash flow in those years. So we really wanted to try to portray not only that period of record, and records go back a long ways. The city's been generating electricity for a long time here, but also what the potential is when it is operating at its best. So great question.
Well, I was just wondering though, with that though, so 30 years, we have 6 positive. Is it 24 negative, 6 positive?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that at the records without having them directly in front, they're probably a little bit right down the middle, that you've seen as many years when there's been a strong positive cash flow as years when it's been either break even or in some cases a negative. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I was thinking of this when you were talking too, and Mark, you just alluded to it, but that's a 30 or 31-year snapshot of a 117-year-old asset. So I'm thinking if you have a 1970 car, and we were trying to look at your expenses for your car, we wouldn't look at them from 2000 to 2017 and forget about 2000 back to 1970. So we're kind of doing that here, but it's more, we're trying to give you something to think about and chew on, and the last 31 years are probably something we can all relate to. But let's also remember that it was there 86 years before that, and the lines might have looked similar, we don't know.
So following on to Scott's analogy regarding cars, one of the things that has been brought up, it was brought up last year when the process started, was the cost, the expenses that are being shown are just direct expenses. So thinking in terms of a car, that would be saying I'm driving my car and I'm just looking at the cost of gas and saying, what's the benefit as a result of that. The costs currently don't take into account any indirect expenses, and even if you took what is at the city's level and reported to the Public Service Commission, if you took 3% of general and administrative costs, which would cover things like insurance, benefits, and other areas that are direct, impact the total expenses of the hydros, that takes the hydro profitability negative quite quickly. We've asked for that complete analysis to take place over a year ago. I asked 2 days ago of the city to do that and said, well, that's coming. I certainly hope that's coming, because having discussions today where we talk about profitability is misleading at this point. Thank you.
Well, that's not an accurate depiction. Those costs that you see do include indirect depreciation and all the other PSC required categories.
They don't include costs that are in categories 920 and 932, which is general administrative. They do contain depreciation, I agree with you on that, and then the pilot, which is, payment in lieu of taxes. So they do include those numbers, but there are other numbers that should be included as well.
And like we said, on many occasions, and the source data is available to folks if they want to look at it. That is the most accurate picture of the expenses that we have at this time. I think we need to be careful about saying that it's not the numbers. Those are the numbers that are reported, they're available, and people can interpret them any way they like to look at them. But it's not true to say that that it's not an accurate picture of the cost of what's going on with the hybrids. That's
Is it all numbers? Is it administrative and not of just me?
it's what the city has allocated for the cost of the hybrids as best as it can.
So it's generally accepted accounting practice, go through that, and all the things you would do for, say, like a 10K for a company that's considered a financial review.
We're having a hard time getting the question up here, so I think maybe if we want some more dialogue, maybe we get another question. But and I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind state your name and where you're from with the question. So thank you.
Yeah, hi. My name is Dan Wilcox. I'm a 40-plus year resident of the River Falls community in the area. I'm a retired fisheries biologist and project manager for the Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We heard that the cost for relicensing would be approximately $150,000 to $200,000. I think it would be interesting to find out what the city has already spent on this to this point since the pre-application document came out in 2013. I bet it's at least that much already. Now, when the pre-application document came out in May 2013, the community of stakeholders prepared comments with recommendations for studies to be conducted as part of the FERC relicensing. It included economic analyses, like we've been hearing about just now. I mean, a more thorough economic analysis. And the city admittedly has only conducted what they call a preliminary analysis, economic analysis. And we heard just now that, it's pretty much a wash. These dams aren't making a lot of money, and we're not including the opportunity costs lost of having a free-flowing river. We had recommendations for a recreational study. Well, we had a very cursory recreational study done by a power plant operator counting a few heads going by on a few weekends. But that was not a design study, and it's not real data. We had recommendations for studies that were very thoughtful and very detailed from the Kinnickinnick River Land Trust, from the Kayaptuis chapter of Trout Unlimited, from the River Alliance of Wisconsin, from the DNR, from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and from the National Park Service. All those organizations and agencies provided some very detailed recommendations for studies that were based on good science and long experience. So far, besides that cursory recreational study and the preliminary economic analysis, the city has done funded a study of the sediment. They did a contractor did a sediment survey and sediment borings and analytical work and determined the physical properties and chemical composition and contaminant levels in the sediments. So that's a good study. But there have been no other studies yet. So I would say that for relicensing, the cost of relicensing to do the studies that are needed for relicensing will be quite a bit more than the $150,000 to $200,000. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks again to the City of River Falls for sponsoring this entire corridor planning project. It's really, really good for the community. I'm Allison Page, and I live in River Falls. I'm not a river specialist. And I would hope after listening to the conversation tonight that we as a community in the end come together and make this decision, not based on whether something makes money or loses a little bit of money, but really looking at what we value and what is the inherent value of the Kinnickinnic River, and what is the value to this community which we hold highest. Which value do we really hold highest? With that, my question for you relates to the evaluation that you said needs to occur, the economic, the opportunity cost, and the environmental evaluation, which I assume will be done. You mentioned in your earlier comments that the Kinnickinnic River, even given the presence of the hydroelectric plant, is a Class 1 trout stream. So there are a lot of trout north of River Falls, and there's a lot of trout south of River Falls. And you mentioned that the dynamics of the river really change with the hydroelectric plant because it heats up, of course. So we don't see a lot of people trout fishing in River Falls. And I think it's because there probably aren't trout in River Falls. There aren't trout in Lake George, correct?
At this time, I don't have information to say yes or no, but I would highly doubt that there's
trout. You would highly doubt. I've a lot of suckers.
Typically with a reservoir, you would have more, lake-like species in
Right.
there versus the riverine species.
Correct.
And I haven't seen the analysis of what is or
Correct.
isn't, but that's what you would normally expect is more lacustrine versus riverine.
Right. So the river that is impounded is not near as fine a trout stream as is north of River Falls and south of River Falls.
That's correct.
We would agree with that. Okay. So then if you want to talk economics, if we would want to talk about making money or losing money, then you start to talk about things that the economic value of the river. And you don't have to look too far to the south and the west of here, the driftless area, where the economic value in the driftless area of trout fishing is $1.5 billion with a B dollars annually. It's an incredible economic advantage to that area to have active trout fishing. I was in the Twin Cities one day at a store, and I was in the checkout line, and I just happened to be wearing my Free the Kinney blue T-shirt, which I'm wearing tonight. And a gentleman who was across the way came over and tapped me on the shoulder and said, why does the Kinney need to be freed? What's wrong with the Kinney? And I said, well, there's 2 dams in the middle of River Falls, and I'm in favor of removing those dams. And he said, there's dams in the middle of River Falls? I said, where do you live? I live in Minnesota. I said, what do you know about the Kinney? He said, I fish it all the time. And he said, but I've never actually been in River Falls. So I drive out here all the time, but I've never been in River Falls. So at some point, the economic value, if we want to look at money, then let's look at real money. But I just was mostly interested in hearing your comments on the difference in the ecology of the river in River Falls versus north of River Falls and south of River Falls.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for hosting this forum this evening for us to have this community conversation. My name is Michael Page. I'm a lifelong River Falls resident. We're talking a lot tonight about costs and about economics when one of the greatest costs of operating this hydroelectric facility is that of the opportunity costs of maintaining the facility and not having a free-flowing Kinnickinnic River in the heart of our community. We're talking about all these costs and reviewing numbers being presented to this large audience here this evening, significant numbers with great variance, numbers from a single source with different interpretations. But the bottom line is I have a hard time seeing numbers on a screen and converting them into a decision process when those numbers are missing quite a few of substantial overhead costs. The keynote or the biggest factor not included in those would be the initial construction of the dam. It's not even in the preliminary financial analysis. How can we make decisions based on these preliminary numbers when it fails to include a substantial cost such as the construction of the dam?
Thanks. It's a great question, and I'm working from a similar set of financial information, that 31-year period that I think has been mentioned by a couple other people. So I can't tell you reasons why a number is in that data set or not. I think you've had a chance, I know others in the audience have had a chance to be able to look at those numbers. We're not making a decision at this point, certainly not this evening, about the future of the dams. We're here to get feedback just like you're providing, and additional economic analysis will come, in part based on what we hear from these meetings and the cost estimates and the other information that we will need that are maybe non-monetary. They're about the value that the community places on the river and how the corridor, as Leslie said, will inform that decision. And we're bringing those things together at the culmination of our planning workshop at the end of September or early October, when that's scheduled, to be able to then create that report. So I think continue to bring that question in those comments, and we're going to continue to be able to answer those questions as we work through the process. So.
Thank you.
Hi, Matt Lochtrigan. I apologize for interrupting the question. I got a little ahead of me. And the question I had there is just clarification, because the statement, and my understanding is that they are initial financial statements, which means the numbers that you presented are subject to change upon further initial financial information, correct? And the statement that was said over there is they are the numbers, and I accept the fact that the numbers that are presented are accurate for what they are. My question is it a complete financial analysis? And can you just confirm that it is preliminary and there is still much more information that needs to get a true and accurate financial picture?
Again, it's a great question, and I don't have all the answers on what for you would define a complete and accurate financial picture. I've simply represented the information that is available and has been made available, and how the city has, in that 31 years, kept track of costs in those three categories. If there's additional costs that there's a strong opinion about needing to go backwards and try to allocate what costs may have been, or then in the looking forward what costs might be going forward, it's certainly part of the conversation. It's part of what we want to hear about. That's why we're here again today. So I don't have the answer. It's certainly something that can be part of what gets worked on here in the next several months. So,
thank you.
I'm Ben Plunkett, River Falls. The discussion of prior sunk costs into the decision-making process is rather disingenuous, considering that if we remove the dam, we're looking at, instead of amortizing out the depreciation over a period of years, we're looking at that being a cost in a period of 1 year at 100% not amortized over 50 years. And I find that as an argument to make in favor of the dam, it's probably not one that they want to be starting. Or opposed to the dam, excuse me, it's probably not one that really they want to be starting. And not a very honest one to present to this audience, honestly.
thank you.
My name is Maggie Watson, and I live in River Falls. My question is about the timeline that you presented about the FERC process and the studies that would be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was my understanding when the discussion came up for whether to apply for the renewal of the license or to delay the process so that we could have this wonderful project, which is really terrific that everybody is a part of this. But it was my understanding that there was a recommendation from, as Dan Wilcox mentioned, many agencies that studies needed to be done to inform this decision. So I guess I was a little bit surprised that when the timeline came up, there was a date for an intention, or the date of intent, where you notify about what the decision is, and then after that is when the studies would take place. So I just found that
Sure,
it seemed
I can
flipped.
explain that. There are actually studies going on right now as part of the corridor process. And then just formally with the FERC relicensing process, once you start that process, there's a formal, because right now the process is somewhat suspended with the extension. So if the city chooses to relicense, they will, enough time has passed, they'll need to submit a new notice of intent and a new pre-application document. And then normally with that, after you've had, the agencies, stakeholders have had a chance to review that document, you then basically get another crack at it and say, hey, I still have X, Y, and Z questions I would still like addressed, and you could turn that into a formal study request that you submit to FERC, and then the city would look at that and decide whether or not, yes, we want to do that, no, we don't, or this is what we're proposing to do as part of the licensing process. So with that timeline set out with your 1 and 2 studies, that doesn't mean we can't and that we're not doing some things right now. It's just kind of the way the formal process is laid out through FERC.
Okay. And then when can we find out, or what studies can you mentioned that there are some studies that are happening now, or can you say what they are right now? That would be great.
More detail than I can.
There's a variety of different studies that we're working on. Recently, we did the stream morphology, both upstream and downstream of the 2 dams. We're doing the hydrologic and hydraulic modeling and updating the information. So while that was there, we're updating that to look at both the condition with the dams and with the dams removed. And so those would be a couple of examples of things that are underway right now. I think that the other part to not forget, and so I liked your question because there was a lot of good study and a lot of good comments that were received as part of the pre-application document. But I think the part that was missing and why we're here and why we're talking about a corridor planning process is we really wanted to make sure we also heard from the full community. And so as Leslie put it, we've kind of got suspended in a way to allow some of this to happen and to come alongside those technical studies as well to find out what does the community really want, and not about removal or relicensing, but how the river will fit in the community and the vision of what that will be, not just for today or tomorrow, but for the next 50 to 100 years. So that's really why we're here. It doesn't mean those studies and the need for them go away. They're certainly part of the process, whether part of the decision to relicense or as part of the relicensing or surrender process.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily Page. I'm a River Falls resident. My question is for Leslie. You spoke when you were talking about relicense or surrender. When you spoke about surrender, you mentioned that FERC could accept or deny our application for surrender. When you spoke about relicense, you didn't quite specify if they can also deny that. So can you speak to, can they accept and deny both options? What factors do they consider in accepting or denying the application? And then the community voice, where does that fit into FERC's decision to accept or deny whichever option we decide to go with?
Sure, thank you for your question. And I'll start with the last question, how the community voice plays a role. Through this corridor planning process, it's, this is part of the community voice. And as the city is going through the application process, I'll just use that as a general term for either one at this point. As they're going through an application process, the stakeholders, which is all of you guys, have the opportunity to share comments with FERC. You can say, I'm in support of this, I'm not in support of this, and those are all things that FERC takes into consideration when they're looking at potential studies that might need to be conducted. And then also, if a license were to be granted by FERC, they would have a document with certain conditions that need to go along with it, so that's where some of those concerns might come up, or they might hopefully already. The goal of the process is to work with the community and the stakeholders and address any concerns that there might be through the processes of either relicensing or surrender. And the reason we talk about whether or not FERC approves or not approves the license surrender is because for them it's a change in condition. So FERC has a license for the current condition, which includes 2 hydroelectric projects. And with that, the city certainly has to make sure they're maintaining dam safety and running things as is outlined in their license. And when FERC is reviewing the application, if they think the application isn't sufficient, or if they need more detail, or if they really feel that there's going to be a negative overall harm to the river corridor by removal, that's a case where they might say, no, we really think these need to stay or something else needs to change. And usually it's not a hard, no, yes or no either, or it's not a hard no either way. They might ask for more information, and then for your question, do they ever say no to relicensing? Not that I'm ever aware of. Usually with what happens, the community and the stakeholders, the agencies, go through the process, and with that process, in the the final document that you get from FERC issuing the license, it would come with a set of conditions, which may or may not be exactly what the licensee wants. They might have to do some things changing their operation to satisfy concerns of agencies or stakeholders. Does that answer all your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Again, I was speaking, and I'm Kevin Westhouse, the utility director, but just to answer the question too about will FERC listen to a community, I think we have evidence of that with our extension, because we had some stakeholders and community members who helped endorse that extension, and I think that might have been the tipping point when we were uncertain if we were going to get that extension. I think some of the stakeholder support on that helped us get that. So I do think FERC does listen, at least the old FERC. We don't have a quorum right now at FERC, but they're working on it.
Can I ask one clarifying question, Leslie, or I guess for more information? You mentioned that with a relicense, FERC might require some additional, I don't know the term.
Additional studies or?
Additional things infrastructure that need to be put in place, or different things that needed to happen for them to feel like we could move on with the relicense. Can you speak to more specifically what that means?
So with the relicensing or with the surrender?
With a relicensing.
With the relicensing. So certain things that they might put in a license would be, they would say you need to continue run-of-river operations, and they would have certain parameters saying, the river could go up, maybe half a foot or 1 foot, a certain level of bounce within that parameter. They might require continuation of water quality studies. It really kind of depends on what questions they might still have or what issues they think need to continue to be addressed throughout the continuation of the license. So those are the type of things that they would be looking at and putting in as conditions in the license.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Donna Vanis, over 70 years in River Falls. I would be interested to know what effect both the retention and removal of the dams will have on our electric rates.
I haven't necessarily done an analysis on that. I'm looking over to Kevin to see if you even venture a guess on that.
I probably shouldn't go too far out on a limb, but I would say the impact on electric rates would probably be fairly insignificant. So I don't want to say up or down, but right now it produces about 2%. If the cost differential between what it costs to produce and our wholesale rate is not that great. We're saving a little bit of money there, but it's not overly significant. And I would venture a guess that if it does have an impact on rates, it'd be fairly insignificant. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Dan Wilcox again. I have a couple questions for Leslie. You said a couple of the positive things about having the dams in place is that the reservoirs act as a stormwater pond or stormwater ponds. I would say that's a rather detrimental situation to have a trout stream serving as a stormwater pond. There does need to be more active stormwater management, and it could be incorporated into a river restoration process. As far as the dams acting as sediment traps, yes, they do. They did. They don't anymore because they're pretty much filled up. And the sediment survey that was done, that the city paid for, pretty much demonstrates that those dams are at quasi-equilibrium with the sediment that's coming in versus going out. Okay. So they're filled. They're not really trapping any more sediment. They do seasonally a bit, but right now there's probably some sediment getting eroded out of the ponds, but later at low flow they'll accumulate some more. But for the most part, those reservoirs are filled up with sediment. As far as limiting the spread of invasive species, I can't for the life of me think of what species might invade upstream now with the dams in place, or would be able to get upstream past waterfalls if the dams are removed. Do you know of any?
Well, right now, I mean, the Kinnickinnic River is connected directly to the Mississippi River, so there's obviously a lot of invasive species. Information I've seen, carp is a big one with the Mississippi, and most scientists don't believe that carp necessarily are likely to come up a cold water fishery like this. Mussels are certainly a concern, zebra mussels, quagga mussels, and then again, there's also the unknown of what species are going to be there in the future. Every time we turn around, there's a new invasive species that's coming on board. So right now, in the Kinney specifically, there's not one major threat that's knocking right at the door like there is in some other areas of the state. In other areas of the state where they're no longer really looking at things like fish passage because of concern of VHS and some other invasive species. So right now, the threats aren't incredibly high, but I think there is certainly a possibility of that in the future, just knowing how invasives work in general.
Well, the main invasive species that we have in Lake Louise is common carp. And as far as the Asian carp in the Mississippi, they can't leap up over these falls and river falls. So we can't expect them to go upstream, nor would they want to. It's pretty cold up there. Thanks.
Yep.
My name is Peter Dom. I have the presence to be here tonight as the chair of the Kinnickinnic River Land Trust, which has about 450 members. And you asked a few moments ago what we really are all here for, and I guess that prompted me to get up and say, well, we're here because, at least from the perspective of the Land Trust, we intend to meet our mission, which is work with the community to make the river a better place and the community a better place, and also to see the river run cold, clean, and free forever. So if you want to know what we want, that's what we want. How we get there is a long process, and you're in that tonight, you're talking about the process. And that's really the essence of my question is I know that we're planning on having an event this fall that's going to be a multi-day event designed to try and come up with the best input that the community, working with you professionals, and I might say it's fun to be on this side of the mic, Mark, well, I lost my train of thought there, just to try and say, how are you going to take the information from this meeting and set it up into the committee? Or how are you going to try and take the information from the next meeting and set it up into the committee and prepare for the SHRET moving forward? How does all of this, how do these meetings and all of our comments work into the process and the planning process? And ultimately, what is both an economic and a political process on the part of our city council? Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I think the political piece, I believe that our planning process will try to stay out of that aspect of it from the planning workshop and so on. The economics certainly is going to be part of the decision, and so are the comments. So after each one of these events, we try to kind of come back together and talk about what are the things that we're hearing and why we hear consistent things from meeting to meeting. We also, from time to time, hear a new voice or a new idea. And so I really think that what we're wanting to try to do, and it's a long process. We started meeting here December 8th. I saw a lot of the same faces out here at our kickoff meeting, and we're talking about our last Tech Talk, not until September, and that feels like a long time. So I think how are we going to do that is we're wanting to come out and be here often enough to make sure we're hearing it not only once, but more than once, and then begin to factor it into the technical studies, to the analysis that would support multiple alternatives of what the Kinney through the community could look like with the dams in place, or a scenario where one of the hydros might be removed or both of the hydros might be removed, and then also gauge the reaction of the community to those alternatives. And then finally coming back and putting some numbers and looking at the economic analysis that goes forward. That serves to do one thing at that point, and that's really to inform a decision that gets made by the city council on a recommendation of our committee, and based on what we hear from the community. The conclusion of the relicensing decision, the corridor planning process continues to refine what is the preferred alternative now that's come out of that, now that we understand what that looks like and the relicensing decision has been made, and ultimately an implementation plan for the overall corridor planning document. So there's a lot of work to go. There are a lot of comments that are coming in a variety of sources. They're coming in via email, they're coming in through social media, and we're doing our best to get our arms around all of that. But the best thing is for us to be out on a frequent basis and hearing that and increasing the amount of touch points, and we will plan to be doing that here in the next several months. So.
Thank you, Allison Page again. Sheila and I were just chatting in the back of the room about green energy and how we are, I would assume all of us in the room are in favor of green energy. I just got done building a medical center that doesn't even have a furnace in it, and that's great. But when we leave these events, I always think we should have heard more from the national experts who are here to help us, and we really appreciate you bringing your expertise here tonight. So Leslie, could you speak a little bit about what you're seeing nationally? You mentioned, you threw up on one of the slides, how many dams are being removed across the country. Can you speak a little bit as to why? And then is anybody putting dams in to capture hydroelectric power? And can you speak to that a little bit? And if there were no dam in the Kinnickinnic River right now, and we were going to FERC to propose that we would dam the Kinnickinnic River, any thoughts on how that would go?
Sure. And you asked a lot of questions there, so let's start with one and make sure I don't forget. So, okay, let's start backwards. Actually, can you just repeat your first question again? I want to make sure I get it right. I want to start at the beginning. What was your first question?
It was the national trend.
Oh, the national trend. So, yeah, so why are dams being removed? Okay, thank you. Dams are being removed because, for a variety of reasons. So it could be removed overall function of the dam. Generally, dams are built to last, but they are man-made structures, so they do have a life, if you will, before they would either need to be replaced or repaired. So some dams are being removed because, looking at an economic analysis, the cost of keeping them in versus repairing them might not make sense, and that happens both for hydroelectric projects and then also just for the local mill pond for dams that are there. It's always been there, people skate in it in the winter, the community might decide to keep it or remove it, just because of the cost of maintaining it. So a lot of the decisions come down to cost. From the hydroelectric perspective of keep it or remove it, most of the time that's the utility making an economic decision. Overall trends, while a lot of dams are being removed in the United States, there's still not a ton of hydroelectric facilities that are being removed. That said, the ones that are removed, the FERC licensed hydros that have been removed are generally the smaller ones that aren't producing as much power, so the utility might look at their energy portfolio and say, you know what, we don't need this anymore. We either want to sell it or we just want to decommission it. Some have been taken out to fulfill settlement agreements, so the company might be able to do something else if they're willing to take out a hydroelectric dam in a certain location. So again, what was your second question?
Are you seeing any hydroelectric dams go in?
Right now, what the trend is for hydropower growth is to power existing dams that don't currently have electricity that are being generated. So, for example, there's a lot of large Army Corps of Engineer dams that are there for flood control and other purposes. So there are some developers right now looking at, and there's actually, somewhat of a push from the federal government, from Department of Energy, to actually add power to some of those existing dams. To answer your question, is anybody taking a clean stretch of river and putting a new dam across it for hydroelectric power? No, that's really not happening right now. And with the way our environmental laws and regulations are, and with agencies and stakeholder input, that's not likely to happen. And part of that's just kind of the way the world is right now, but part of it's also the best areas for hydropower have already been been taken. There's already dams there, and they're already producing hydroelectric power. So it's kind of a double pronged of why there's a no for that. For any new, there are some pump storage projects which we didn't talk about that there is potential for new ones, but that's kind of a whole different scenario that we don't need to get into the weeds in here. But
So if we were sitting here tonight and there were no dams in our river, would it be likely that FERC would grant us approval to dam up our Kinney today?
probably not. No, with Kinney or any other, there's not a lot of brand new dams going in. It's more powering existing dams that's getting looked at right now.
Kevin?
Just because, I don't know if this isn't U.S., but in Manitoba, they're putting in one up by Hudson Bay. I was in a meeting today, 85 megawatts in the transmission line down into the northern part of the United States. So not U.S., but there's an 85 megawatt one going up by Hudson Bay.
Yeah, it's a good point, Kevin. And worldwide, there actually is a lot of brand new hydro going in. So South America, Asia, China certainly has a lot of new hydro that's going in. And I think a lot of us, we have a lot of the old infrastructure here, and with our U.S. environmental regulations, we're not putting in a lot of new ones. But in other places, they certainly are.
So we're getting near time here. We'll take another question or so, but we'll be here afterwards as well, and so we'd be happy to talk to folks if they hadn't had a chance to ask a question tonight. So go ahead.
Last question.
Yep. Yes, this is Brian Anderson in River Falls. Just a quick question about the numbers. Early on in the slideshow, you brought up that the nationwide we're running 8% on hydro power generation. How do we compare in River Falls? 270 homes, 8%, 5%, 3%, 10%?
Thanks. I think the number is just
above
under
it or below
2%.
it?
Around 2% is the number right now. Great. Thanks again. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. But an important reminder that again, I know there's a lot of discussion around the subject of dam removal and so on. July 20th, right in the middle of your summer, I understand, but July 20th we'll be back to talk and listen to your thoughts and comments on dam removal alternatives. And I appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you.